Hello again, everybody. We are back for our latest episode of Boardroom RevOps, where we're bringing you valuable tips from RevOps experts so you can make it to the C-suite. I'm James, the co-founder of Account AIM, the RevOps data and BI platform. Really excited to welcome Sergei Stepanov to the show today. He's a VP of RevOps Analytics at Modus. Sergei, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, James. So glad to be here.
It's gonna be fun. Sergey and I were talking a while back with some of his reflections in his career. Obviously, he's made it to the VP level, covers with RevOps and analytics, and he mentioned a couple of things that were really interesting to me as reasons for his success. And those were treating RevOps as a science and also building a great team with a kind of slightly different approach to team building than I've heard from other folks. So we're gonna cover those two things today. But first, Sergey, do you want to kind of share your quick background for folks?
Yeah, of course. Glad to. So career started in accounting and finance. Then I sort of moved into strategy, which eventually went into RevOps. I think the funny thing about it is I don't think any kid sort of grows up thinking they want to be in RevOps, but I think that non-linearity is kind of what gets us all here, right? Like especially the leaders of RevOps as I sort of meet diverse backgrounds. And so the mix of finance, the analytics, the strategy is exactly what I think is getting us to that leadership level these days. Today I lead, as you mentioned, the RevOps and analytics at Modus, mainly focusing on turning that revenue growth into something that we can measure, and predict and definitely scale.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good segue to kind of the first topic here. Like you mentioned that you like to think about RevOps as a science. Can you tell me more what you mean by that?
Yeah, most certainly. I love this topic. So I think most organizations treat revenue operations as an art, right? Especially the revenue itself. So you've got sort of your sales intuition, you got your marketing experiments, the testing, A/B testing, and you got your gut-based forecasting, right? But if you want that growth to be predictable, right, like it cannot come from intuition. So there has to be some systematic thinking that is measurable, right? And so the way that I frame the RevOps specifically is, as you mentioned, it's the science to me. And that science is comprised of sort of three parts, right? So first you define the variables. And those variables are very simple. We all know those, like pipeline creation, you've got your win rates, you've got your sales cycles. And then what you want to do is you want to measure that. So that's like cause and effect, right? And so those are the actions that actually drive the output, right? Positive is what we focus on, right? And then you build your models, right? And like those are the predictive models that we're building. So that three-step specifically, it gets you that engine that designs the growth. So if we think of sales and we could say sales produce revenue, then in my mind, RevOps sort of engineers the system that produces sales.
Uh-huh. That's great. I love it. So we got variables that are effectively like the business levers. So you need to understand like the business. Now it's kind of like the strategic, the business acumen, and then the models is like, okay, how do we actually put this together and like drive execution? Is that the right recap of that?
Yeah, that's precisely it.
Awesome. So walk me through then like an example of like that RevOps operational model for a company. Then like how do you actually put this kind of into practice? What does that look like?
Yeah. So now, and I think as we go deeper, right? Like so you start thinking about it as sort of four engines, and everybody can again align to that, especially your audience, specifically the RevOps. I'd say you got the market engine, right? So that's the top of funnel. That's where the demand gets generated. Then you got your pipeline, right? Like, so that's how we convert now this demand into opportunities. You got your sales engine, right? Which is basically now taking those opportunities and converting them into revenue. And the last but not least, I would say is the expansion engine, right? This is how we expand our customers. So that's the growth itself. When we think of RevOps as a science and that growth that's tied to it, I think what we want to be able to answer, especially the questions, is if the companies want to grow 30% ARR, right? Like what actually needs to change? Or how much pipeline do we need to meet those goals, right? And so as you think about it, those are the answers that should come out from the four engines if you have them set up correctly. And I think as you get into the operational model itself, right, and you sort of start laying out the model, I would definitely highly recommend the model, right, to be almost like your check mark. It's almost like, what is the framework that you can identify within your own organization today, where you can put a hard check mark on it, bold one, I would say, versus something that you might want to look into. So as you think about data infrastructure, right? You have the components. You got your CRM hygiene, I would say, your actual CRM architecture, right? Your integrations and your attribution models. And so when you think about those, can you check off all four? And if you do, then you're going on to the second layer, right? Like, so now you've got the foundation. The next comes your operational system. So that's your, I'd say that's your forecasting, your pipeline management, sort of your time planning, your commissions, your deal desk. That's the core RevOps, I think. And what I just highlighted is probably every leader is facing that. That's kind of like the governance of that revenue execution. So this is where majority of our teams live today, right? And so you got the third layer, which is your strategic model. This is where I believe truly every revenue operations team needs to be at, right? Because this is where you're getting into what will happen next quarter, right? Like what growth is actually achievable for us? Like where should we invest our dollars? Should it be BDR? Should it be marketing? Should it be partnership? How should we split it? And so like this is where you build those multi-year models, you build your TAM analysis, right? You build your capacity planning. So as most companies live in the layer 2, right? The layer 3 is where we want to focus on. So if you think about it from that perspective, I would say good revenue teams report on what happened, and the great ones, they design what will happen.
How do folks get to that point? Because I agree, and whenever I chat with like VPs of RevOps, they make many of them make a similar point, phrased differently. But like you want to get from kind of like reactive to proactive. I can see a world where a decent RevOps person is kind of just like doing all of the governance, the forecasting cadence, the commissions. They're doing a good job, but they're not adding that true business partnership with like their CRO or executive team. So like, what does it take to get you to that point? I hear you on data infrastructure. Is it other things as well?
I believe that you also pass the data infrastructure, which is the first layer. We got to get into the second layer that supports now the combined efforts of multiple departments, right? Like we have to play a role of being a sort of cross-departmental glue. And I think that then starts in the conversations in the meetings at the highest level. So those are the responsibilities of those VPs and senior directors in us to lead the discussions. So when we are in those discussions, we need to be able to come to those meetings, not just with reporting, not just with sort of like historical data, but also with information, how the relationships of each department, so almost like the outputs, how do they tie back into a single goal? And that single goal is always revenue growth, right? It's always the efficiency and so on. So if we are talking at the level where we're now tying everybody back together towards one single cohesive goal, we become the source of truth. And as soon as we become the source of truth, then we're developing the model in collaboration with the leaders, like your CMOs, your CROs, your COOs, chief product officers, and so on. This is how I believe you will see a shift. Because if we continue to come to meetings, simply bringing the latest reports, the latest weekly, monthly, year-over-year analysis, we sort of almost guard ourselves in that layer 2, and we never move to layer 3.
Yeah. So, like, a tactical example, is there one recently or from your career, for example? Like, I often hear about these classic, like, alignment meetings where RevOps is holding people accountable to, like, the definitions of what actually is a lead, what is pipeline, and then how are those leads getting worked and converted to pipeline? Is this kind of what you're talking about being like that glue? Or, like, what's an example from that you can kind of draw on to articulate the point?
I love that. And that is exactly the type of meetings that we want to be having. In my experience, those we would normally call sort of like the go-to-market pipeline meeting or go-to-market council, whatever the name may be. The function of that meeting and the output is precisely that. This is where we get together the majority of the heads of the business, right? The go-to-market leaders. This is where we have an honest discussion. But that only occurs once you have the necessary foundation in place. And by that, I mean, you've got your attribution models. So everybody knows what they're actually driving towards, right? And the ambiguity in terms of like cross-pollination, right? Like where you have assisted pipeline that kind of remains on the sidelines because here you can track it mutually exclusive for each leader. That then allows them to talk about ROI, that gets them to talk about conversion models and so on. So this is the discussion, and having it all in one place. Now you're starting to govern those discussions, and you can definitely aim them. And you're right, each company will be at a different level, right? Like some might need to focus on top of funnel. Some might need to talk about aging pipeline, right? But you can only find that out in these meetings. And once you have all the leaders in one place, this is where you can make really strategic decisions as opposed to the isolated decisions we make when we meet one-on-one with CMO, one-on-one with CRO, and so on.
Yeah, that's great. I want to move on to kind of team building here next, but I also want to make sure that I kind of like encapsulate RevOps as a science and make sure I didn't miss anything or that you don't have anything else to add. But basically, you're kind of talking me through like the RevOps kind of operational model for a company is like you need to understand your four engines: marketing, which is top of funnel, pipeline creation and conversion, sales, so closing revenue, and then expansion. To do this well, so you need to understand the business levers and how all these things kind of flow through. That can lead to like goal setting. To do this well, you need to have like the basic data hygiene together, which is like CRM, hygiene, attribution models. You can then tie this into like a governance and cadence around the things that need to happen week to week, forecasting, commissions, deal desk, etc. Once you have all that, you can overlay like the strategic kind of element to make sure that folks understand what is going to happen next or how should they spend their money versus just reporting the past. Is that a fair encapsulation? What did I kind of miss here?
Yeah, I love this. I mean, your summary is fantastic. And the one way that I would say this for all the folks that are listening to this, I encourage you to think back this past week that you just worked through and think about the questions that your leadership have asked you. If majority of the questions that you received this past week have been around, like, can we get this report done? Or can we pull this dashboard? That's probably not it. But if you're hearing questions are like, what does revenue operations think we should do next? Like, do you think that we should invest into, let's say, more AEs, like account executives? Should we expand our CSMs team? Like, what should we do? When you start getting those questions, you have the ability now to really, truly utilize the direction that we're sort of discussing today, right? And be the driver, right? And so I think that's the easiest reflection that I found. If you want to sort of just look back 1 week.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a good litmus test. Cool, Sergey. Really interesting. Anything else to add on RevOps as a science? Any of these things? Any advice for folks, or should we move on to kind of building a team?
I think let's get
all right.
moving.
Let's keep it moving. All right. So building a great team. You mentioned to me you kind of have an unusual philosophy in terms of like hiring, building the team, selecting teammates. I guess I'm sorry to kind of steal your tagline, but you don't hire traditional RevOps folks for the most part. Tell me more about this. Why is that?
Well, what I think is that like most traditional RevOps hires, as we all know, come from Salesforce administration or sales operations, right? And so I'm not here to say that those skills are not useful. Totally are. It's a bit narrow. And that is, I think, one of the discussions that we want to have. And I think this is because I truly believe that RevOps has expanded so far out from what it used to be that it's not just, sort of like systems function anymore. It's not about just the core operations. I think now there is analytics, definitely, but there's also behavioral psychology. I think there's economics. I think there's process engineering. And when you say that out loud, you start thinking about, well, wait a minute, like those might be a completely different type of folks that you want to be looking at, right? So what I hire and the people that I focus on, I want people to also understand the systems, but I also want them to understand the incentives, right? And so the best people that I've hired in the past have definitely come from, your finance, your accounting, but also from economics, from engineering, from sociology, and even from psychology, because revenue, especially like in my mind, is fundamentally about human behavior, right? And it's interactive with incentives, right? And so you have sales incentives. We always talk about buyer psychology and market dynamics, right? So those people that I listed, I think they often think about those processes more structurally. And that is exactly what we're looking for.
That's really interesting. So how does this line up? I mean, are you hiring for like narrowish roles? Like, are you bringing in these folks as RevOps generalists? Or like, how do you think about matching the role to that profile. Like to me, for example, I I wouldn't know the first thing about where to put like a psychologist by background, as I'm sure they're, would be very intelligent and stuff. But how do you think about matching like the competencies with like the job to be done?
That's a good one. I honestly, I look for product like problem solving, like, and
Mm,
that's the framework that I want to look for. So as you assess the functional competencies of each team within RevOps, you start to understand things, right? Like you're looking for unit economics, you're looking at forecasting, and you're looking at modeling, which is what we just discussed, right? I think. And so the individuals that you're looking for, you want those individuals to have sort of like statistical thinking or like the acumen
mm,
specifically, right? And so as you engineering processes, you also want engineering type of thinking towards those processes. So as I build those teams, let's just get into the example. I think that's interesting because you mentioned psychologists, like where could you actually use one? So in my opinion, you got two roles within RevOps where you can really use that type of thinking. One of them being deal desk, another
mm.
one being commissions. And I'll tell you why. So on the deal desk, the skills that I would look for is definitely finance intuition, right? Like you want to make sure that the numbers are the numbers, but you also need to have somebody that knows contract logic, right? And you also want them to be a very consulting minded individuals because it's not just the unit economics of the process, but it's also the approval flows and it's also working with those sellers, right? Because the deal does become sort of like your core function between now getting that deal across the board, right? And so there you need somebody that really understands the human nature, not just for your potential customer, but also for your internal members,
Yeah, definitely.
right? And then on the commission side, I think it's maybe a little bit more straightforward, but that's behavior design, right? Like commission is basically incentives. It's financial planning, it's scenario testing. So you want them to either be good economists, because in itself it's almost like a small economy, or those that actually understand again how can we tie incentives to company strategy and so on. So that has been something that I've been able to really do well with those two functions, I would say, where you're thinking about psychology or maybe even sociology majors.
That's really fascinating, and I feel like you can correct me if I'm wrong. This feels potentially higher reward, but maybe also higher risk if you're hiring someone with less direct experience. So, like, how in the interview process do you assess them? Is it a lot of uh, case studies and things like this? See how they think, or how do you assess?
It's much simpler than that, actually, what I found. Interesting enough, as we were sort of discussing, over the past 12 months, I was fortunate to be able to hire a large team, right? And then so I've interviewed tens of individuals and I've ended up hiring 9. And so that is quite a large team if you think about it. And so as you go through it, I actually gave a real RevOps problems as a question, right? And so, and that would have been as simple as assessing somebody to say pipeline coverage dropped by 20%. Like, what do you investigate?
Mm,
And how do you do it? Or our sales cycle days increased by 30 days, right? Walk me through how you would actually diagnose it. Because what you want to do is you want to see somebody actually explain to you like structured thinking of the approach of how to resolve this issue, right? And their ability to break it down into very like cohesive and digestible variables,
yeah.
right? And so that's what you're assessing. And in reality, you will get a lot of answers because we're now dealing with individuals with different backgrounds. But that is exactly what we're looking for, because if you already have that skill set, for example, for one of the answers, and you know exactly how your team is going to react for one of these questions, you're now looking for somebody with a different perspective.
Yeah, like the
Right?
benefits of diversity for sure.
Exactly. And that's exactly what you're looking for, because at the end of the day, you're not just looking to build a function, you're looking to build a department, right? And department is like a machine,
Mhm.
in my opinion, right? And this machine works because everybody has a different experience and opinion. And so you want that to be diverse.
That's great. Yeah, all of this ties back to like RevOps as a science too. Your interview questions are very structural, kind of like scientific, and all fits together nicely. If you're hiring all of these folks with very different backgrounds, I assume training becomes a lot more important. Like, how do you think about training folks that maybe don't have specific RevOps experience when they join up?
I mean, and you're right. And we just kind of started touching on it. It's all about that team building, right? And so the one huge advantage that I found is that like traditional RevOps hires will normally bring in their playbooks, right, from previous
Yeah.
organizations. That's both a positive and a negative, I think, right? Depending on what you're trying to build. But we're trying to, because in what we're just discussing here, we're not trying to build legacy systems here. We're trying to build a team for the future, right? And with that in mind, you're starting to assess. So when you have people from different backgrounds, they start to question the assumptions, but they do that differently, right? And so they would question how the systems work, right? The revenue systems that are currently set up, like how do sales teams operate, right? How does pipeline get built and how does it behave? But if you think about those three items, revenue systems, how do teams operate and how does pipeline behave, right? Those different backgrounds that we just discussed, they will ask those questions completely differently and they'll be looking for different answers in those questions too, right? Because we're not just talking about, they're not just worried about the numbers. They're looking for different aspects based on their experience. And so the upside of this fresh thinking is what I think really is giving us opportunity to build these incredible teams that now have these diverse experiences.
Yeah, super interesting. Sergey, this has been great. We're sadly almost at time. I need to have you on another episode to go deeper even. But I also wanted to ask you to kind of like cap this off. Obviously, you have strong opinions around how to run a RevOps function. I think it's worked really well for you, clearly. I feel like it's always easier said than done. There's a ton of hard work, and I also am cognizant of the fact that in RevOps, it can often be hard to move past kind of that middle layer. In many companies, RevOps is a department of one or two. They're just seen as like an admin or like a doer. Like, what would your advice be for folks that are maybe sitting at like the manager level, maybe have one person on their team? Like, how can they get to this point where you've built a great team, you've become a strategic partner, etc. Like, yeah, any final advice for folks?
It might sound a bit different than others would have said it, but I would say you have to take risks in this specific role. And by risks, I mean responsibilities, because with every responsibility, there's both a benefit and a risk that comes with it. And if you have a team of two or a team of three, and now you're in sort of that in the no man land, and then you're kind of in the middle, and you're looking at like what else can you be doing? This is a great opportunity to start looking at the core functions of those larger teams. So I would definitely encourage those managers to say, look at similar type of companies as you are in today and look at the teams that are doing there. Like, what are they responsible for? Because there's definitely responsibilities that you're currently doing right now that are the basic responsibility that actually are truly holding you from expanding because you're very limited, right? And what we talked about in the past is if you're at that layer two and you continuously just reporting on things, that is the functionality of RevOps. And this is exactly how the leaders would see it as. What I mean by taking on more responsibilities and risks, I would say definitely try to get into those more strategic discussions and volunteer yourself, like volunteer your knowledge, volunteer your time, and take on those responsibilities. It could start at a small project. Let's say it could be a TAM analysis, TAM expansion analysis, right? Maybe that's something that you're not doing today. That way you start to build up your own portfolio and your team's portfolio as a true organizational sort of know-how, right? And you want to separate yourself from the reporting functions like in accounting and finance. And I think that gives you at least that perspective and opportunity. We're definitely in a world where today not a lot of companies recognize value for RevOps, right? And like the one thing I would say is that I wish companies treated RevOps just like supply chain, right? It's a system that could be measured, optimized, right, and engineered. This is what we're here to do, and I think this is how it starts.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to leave it. I totally agree. I think it's great advice. I do think some organizations though just don't appreciate RevOps, and sometimes it's time to look for something new if you can't change their mind. So fit is important too. But Sergey, this is awesome. I really appreciate the time. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.